This week is a very important episode for me personally, but also because I found somebody on social media who shares a lot of similarities in an experience I've had in my life. Her name's Kyla Steele, and she's a post-abuse recovery expert. But more importantly, she's also somebody who has been through an abusive relationship, as have I. I don't want to say excited to have you on, but I'm really looking forward for us to talk. Hi, Kyla. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me on.
And it feels weird when I say that. It's not that I'm not excited to talk with you, but it's a difficult topic that excited doesn't feel like the right word to use.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But I am really happy that you were willing to share your story. And as I've mentioned in moments of my time working on the radio show that I do and doing this podcast, people have heard kind of bits and pieces, but I felt it was time. It's been about 8 years for me now, and I think it's really time for me to share a lot more in depth of my story and the experiences I had. And finding your content on social media also showed that that's something that you do. So I would love to hear how you got into this line of work and your story and why it brought you to where you are now.
Yeah. So, oh man, okay. Well, it definitely is not like a linear journey at all.
It never
Um,
is. That's okay.
Never is, but it's crazy because it is kind of like this full circle moment. So, anyways, ultimately, when I had left my abusive relationship, it was a 7 year long relationship. I met him when I was 18 and I left when I was 25. And so when I had left, there was not a lot of awareness around abuse or emotional abuse or psychological abuse. And sorry, that's my dog.
It's okay.
And um, so, anyways, like a lot of women do, I went to a walk-in doctor because I'm like, I am so incredibly depressed. Like, I need someone to like validate me and like just give me some direction and where to go. And it's funny because this one doctor, and I actually didn't even take it seriously at the time, but he asked me, and no doctor has ever done this, but he asked me these three questions, and he was like I told him everything about my relationship, and then he was like, "Okay, so let me ask you this. Like, how do you want to feel in the future?" And I was like, "Well, I want to be happy. Like that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. I'm miserable." He's like, "Okay." He's like, "Well, what is something that you're really passionate about?" And I was like, "Well, I really want to help people and I want to see more of the world. I want to travel the world." He was like, "Okay, and what's a big life goal of yours?" And I was like, well, I want to have like a hobby farm and I want to raise a family like out in the country and build my dream house. And he's like, okay, he's like, well, that's what you need to do right now, Kyla. You need to find your passion. Um, that involves helping people where you can travel around the world and bring in enough income to build that dream house with your family and have a farm. And I was like, okay, like I don't understand how this is going to help me. I'm like heartbroken right now. And so a couple years go by. I'm still grieving the relationship. I'm still very much like heavily in this victim mentality, dating the same types of men. And I was in school in criminology. I was pursuing to become a police officer, and it didn't feel aligned to me. I was not excited about it. And just one day I was like, oh, like this cannot be it for me. Like I'm not excited about it. What can I do? And I always had this like entrepreneurial mindset, but it was never something that was like the norm, right? And so I thought I had to work this 9 to 5. And so it's funny because a couple of years later, I like circled back to that what that doctor had said to me. And so I was just writing in my notebook, like, okay, how can I make a career out of this? And during that time, I was listening to a podcast. I don't know if you've heard of him, but it's Rob Dial, the Mindset Mentor.
Yes.
And he started talking about like, whatever painful situation you've been through, like you can help so many people. And, um, just talking about life coaching. And I'm like, okay, like this is something that I can do. And then from there on, I like just made the decision, like, I'm going to do this. I had no idea what I was doing. And so I just started speaking about my story. And yeah, here we are a couple years later.
Okay, so I want to get into a few parts of this. When you say doctor, did you just go to a regular doctor or are you talking to a therapist?
No, I didn't even have any money for a therapist. This was strictly a walk-in doctor.
Wow. Okay. Really cool doctor because not often is that what happens.
I know. And a couple prior to that wanted to put me on antidepressants. And I was like, I really want to try to heal this the natural way. And so I never went that route. And yeah, he honestly, he is amazing.
And then also, you had mentioned your relationship was several years long. If I had to guess, that was not a consistent several years long.
No, no, it was not.
Okay, walk me through your relationship a little bit. And I don't want to say abuse you endured, but your experiences with abuse in this particular relationship.
Yeah. So, like I'd said, I met him when I was 18, and at that age, I was going through a lot. I was like partying a lot, hanging out with a bad crowd. My parents were in this spot where they were maybe going to separate, maybe divorce, and that was really hard on me. I got kicked out of the house for using drugs, and so I was living with, not very good people. And so I was a very broken girl when I met him. Very low self-esteem. I had other little high school relationships where I was, the first boyfriend I ever had, he cheated on me. And so, anyways, so I had met my ex during that time, after that relationship where I got cheated on in high school. And so he at the beginning, he was like my knight in charming or shining armor. Like he, would drop flowers off at my house and he'd walk me home and like in the pouring rain, send me these notes. Like he was just everything that I wanted. And but it was always like a little bit rocky. Like we were, abusing alcohol and partying a lot. And so there would be a lot of fights. And there was always almost like every other month, I was always like, "Ah, I can't do this. I can't do this. No, this isn't going to work." And he always knew how to kind of like charm me back into the relationship. And so as soon as I graduated high school, we ended up living together. And so once we started living together, that's when the emotional and verbal abuse started to get a little bit worse. And it would just be him like leaving the house for days, like abandonment, but then coming back in and like acting as if nothing happened. And by that time, you're already so deep into the trauma bond, which is this like emotional dependency. And so leaving became so much harder. Um, and at that time, the good times kind of outweighed the bad. But then as the years went on and he kind of had way more control over me, it then turned into like way more bad times. And then the bad times would get a lot worse. So a lot of manipulation, a lot of lying, infidelity, um, like destroying the house, property damage, things like that. Um, so yeah, it got over time, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I had left, I mean, at one point I had left for 8 months. And I don't think a lot of women know this, but just because you leave the relationship doesn't mean you're not trauma bonded to them anymore. Like I still had so many codependency wounds that I wasn't dealing with. And so 8 months later, I was still just as heartbroken and so dependent on him that I went back for another 2 years.
Everything that you're saying, I unfortunately relate to. And I also unfortunately know a lot of people can relate to. It's more common than we know because oftentimes with abusive relationships, what happens behind closed doors is never what's happening out in the world. It only happens within the home. And so it's really easy, especially much like it sounded yours was, when they're super charming and they seem like this great person and they're out in the world and everybody loves them. Heck, my family loved him at one point when I was dating him. And yeah, you know that experience. And but you're the one who's experiencing different things behind closed doors, but it gives you a very interesting dynamic where you are questioning everything all the time because nothing seems real. Because one moment you have this person, the next you have a different person. So everything you're saying, I can totally relate. And we're going to kind of break a few of these down in different directions.
Okay. Yeah.
Something you had mentioned was how it was good moments and there was bad, and he'd pull you back in. I think a lot of times when I talk about my abusive relationship, people will be like, well, why didn't you just leave? Why
Mhm.
didn't you just get out of it? Why didn't you just stop? And you're talking about the trauma bond. The trauma bond is so important, and it's so important when it comes to relationships like this. This is the only time that this phrase actually is and should be used. There are not trauma bonds in other scenarios. Like this is what it is meant to be used for, is abusive relationships. And it's so unique and you feel so connected to this person. So talk me through for you from the experience of why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you just one day say stop? Like tell me that experience for you because I also can attest that it was never as easy as why don't you just leave?
No, and never. So for me, I felt this like great responsibility to help him. Like because when you see them being so loving and being so funny and all these amazing qualities, you're like, yes, you can be like this. You can be so much better. Like, you're only acting this way because you're a hurt and broken person. And that is true, but it makes it so it almost makes it like it's your responsibility. Like you feel like you love this person so much that you don't want to abandon them and I think like for me it's like women that get into these types of relationships are extremely empathetic, good-hearted, beautiful women, and they really just have these wounds of just being wanted and loved. And so it's like if they kind of put their purpose into changing this person, then they're feeling fulfilled inside. You know what I mean?
Yep, very much so. It was where I started to really hate that I had a big heart. He was the beginning of that experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you can attest to that. You start to hate that you're empathetic. You hate that you want have this desire to help people. You hate that somebody has used that against you because now you don't want to use it anymore. They take that power away from you.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. Yeah, and it's hard because when you're in those relationships, you really give it your all, and then when you leave, you're like, I can never do this again, and I don't think I'll ever want to do this again. And so it's really unfortunate and soul crushing because you it's like they took your innocence away, right? And you have so much love to give, and when they just when you almost like tell yourself that you can never do that again, it's really unfortunate because the right man really does deserve that from you. And yeah.
Something I experienced often was a constant push and pull. I felt like we would be connected and then something would happen and then we'd be back to this very toxic going at each other all the time because there was a part of me that was always fighting. There was a part of me that always wanted to stick up for myself and always like understand that I shouldn't take this. But when you mention that trauma bond, I don't think people understand what happens in a trauma bond. You feel so connected to this person that even when they are hurting you, you feel like they still love you. And can you imagine a more complicated experience than having that? So, did you have that same experience with that trauma bond?
Oh, 100%. And I think that's why women have such a hard time with believing that they're abusive. And they
Hmm.
make excuses for that because it's like, no, I know he would never intentionally do this to hurt me. And I think that is the hardest part out of it all is accepting that they never loved you. And that makes one feel very, very crazy because you're in this like completely twisted, distorted reality. That's not even reality. It's yeah, that's the hardest part about it for me at least.
There was a moment for me, I want to say it took 3 years after this relationship ended for me to finally come to terms with the fact that I was in an abusive relationship. I don't think I could accept for a really long time that that had happened to me. Did you ever experience that? Do you experience that a lot with your clients where there's just this moment of it finally clicks, but most of the time it takes a really long time for that to happen?
Yes. It's interesting because I actually just had a coaching call with one of my clients and she was offered a domestic violence worker for this mediation and she had expressed that she wasn't sure if she needed one or wanted one and she's like it's so hard for me to accept that I need one and I think for a lot of women it's because when you're in that relationship you're so like your brain is rewired to believe that you're overreacting, that you're crazy, that you're the toxic one. And so imagine all those years, however long you've been in that relationship, and someone telling you that, like that is going to affect your brain. And so it's almost like this little voice in your head. I mean, sometimes when I put out even content on my social media and I tell a story, like sometimes I'm like, oh, I hear him kind of in my head being like, that's not true. That didn't happen. Like you're over exaggerating. And so I think it just all comes with that little voice in your head with what they have been conditioning you to believe.
When you mentioned that kind of control they have over your mind, when I was in this, there was moments where it would be really bad and I will have ended it. I say, I'm done, leave me alone. And he would show up to my work with flowers. He would follow me when I was out in public. He would just show up on my doorstep. He would threaten suicide. He did so many things that made me feel like I did not have control, even though I did in a way. But there was like this survival in me that existed where I felt I had to accept it because it was more important for me to survive those scenarios than to tell him no.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard thing to come to terms with when you look back. There's a lot of shame associated with that, that
Mhm.
you feel like you couldn't put your foot down when really you didn't have control in the first place. Because imagine somebody's really threatening your life and who you are and your safety as a human being. And you're just supposed to say, no, I'm going to walk away. Please leave me alone. But this is someone who notoriously does not listen.
Mhm.
So that experience is also part of this. And I know you had mentioned something like this in your content and social media, like where they find this way to pull you back in. Can you give some examples of what you've seen? You heard some of mine, but maybe for other people, because I think it's really easy to mistake some of those things as love and as somebody really wanting you when it isn't.
Mhm. I think a big one is like the jealousy or the control. So them saying like, "Oh, I reacted that way at the bar because, I really care about you and I want you to be safe." Kind of thing. I think honestly all the ones that you just said my ex did as well and those are all big ones like they call that hoovering, the stalking. And yeah, I think that that's a way for them to like maintain control and to kind of always see where you're at. And again, like you said, like threatening suicide, my ex as well did that. Like, I love you so much that if you don't stay with me, I'm gonna die again. That's just all control. So I think the ones that you said are all like from what I've heard are all the big ones.
Yeah. It's really tough. And I feel like in a lot of scenarios, we've really been taught to sometimes accept the bare minimum because I don't know if you ever had this experience for your relationship, but for me, I really wanted to make things work. I was told that once you're in it with somebody, you figure it out and you work through things together. But what I was failing to realize in this relationship, because I had zero experience with abuse, was that I was the only one that actually wanted to make something work. I was the only one who was fighting for something that didn't really exist. Do you have some experience with that too?
Yes. And I think it's so interesting because you see movies and it's almost like that type of like intense fighting and then leaving and not coming back for months and then them all of a sudden showing up on your doorstep, with flowers and a huge apology and all these grand gestures. Like, I know for me, that was normalized, right? Like fights are normal. We say things we don't mean. Like it was just so normalized for me. I don't think I ever growing up like had a positive like role model of what a relationship should be like. So I don't know if that's the same for you. Like if you ever had someone you looked up to with like a healthy love.
I did. I mean, my parents did, but I think from my experience, this is so hard because I just thought because I hadn't had a lot of good experiences before in relationships. I had, much to your point, I had been cheated on in every relationship I have up until my most recent one. Like this has gone through my entire life. And because I had never had good experiences in relationships before, I almost thought, well, this is someone who really loves me so much that they're really willing to go through it. Like it's kind of, I twisted my mind in a way. He twisted my mind, but then I added to it because I couldn't understand that that's not what a relationship looked like because I had been cheated on. I was like, well, this is somebody who really loves me that they're going to fight for me. And they might fight me, but they're going to fight for me. And that just felt weird. That was such an unusual experience for me. And to have that experience for the first time, I was so ill equipped to handle it. My body didn't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It is it's almost like some deep down subconsciously for me, I think because I was always surrounded by chaos, toxic friendships, even toxic relationships up until, being 15 and having my first boyfriend. And so I think deep down, I thrived in chaos and I was always in survival mode. And so, because I had never experienced calm or peace, that was weird to me. And so I associated chaos and fights with passion and love. And looking back, I can see why I wanted to go into policing because I said, well, I really want to help people, but I also need something that's going to keep me on my toes.
Mhm.
And I think once I finally found that peace, regulated my nervous system, and healed all these wounds, I was like, oh no, like I do not thrive in this situation anymore.
Yeah.
So I think a big part of it too is like subconsciously we associate chaos with passion and love.
And to your point, I think so many movies and TV shows have also taught us that. So
Yes.
we are what we see out into the world. For you, did you experience after this relationship, and maybe you haven't gotten to this point yet, but dating and finding healthy relationships now? What's that experience been like for you?
Yes. So, oh gosh. So I was actually in a year and a half. very healthy relationship for the first time. Unfortunately, we parted ways last October, but it was my first healthy relationship, and it was hard. Um, but I was self-aware enough to be like, okay, Kyla, you can work through these things now. And it honestly, I guess I can fully say now that I'm a cycle breaker and I broke the cycle because yeah, I have experienced a healthy relationship and it is a breath of fresh air. I
It,
never thought I would be able like be into a healthy relationship. Like I always thought it would be boring. And that's just simply not true. It's not true.
it is. It's a mind trick that we definitely play on ourselves for sure. When you were having that first healthy relationship in the beginning, was there a lot of moments of kind of PTSD where you kind of wanted to create chaos because you didn't know how to handle non-chaos?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I wanted to self-sabotage the shit out of that relationship. Like, oh, there's a tiny little problem here. Let's blow this out of proportion so I can leave because I'm extremely uncomfortable right now.
Hmm. And it
Yeah.
is. And to your credit, it at least sounds like you found someone who is willing to be a safe space and work through those things for you. And I think that's really an important part of post abusive relationship dating where you have to truly be able to find someone who is a safe space and who isn't going to take advantage of that side of you because it is. Would you ever, when you were dating and probably dating again now, and this is a part of your story, it's a part of who you are. So when you talk about this stuff dating and you're like, okay, crap, we're getting to the part where I'm gonna have to be vulnerable and I'm gonna have to share that this is a part of who I am. What is that like for you when that starts to happen?
Yeah, and because I'm so like public on social media too, if anyone asks me for like my Instagram, I'm like, "Oh, let's wait on it a little bit. I'd rather tell you things in person." But um I think before I would always lead with my past going into relationships. And I think I still was very much in that like victim mentality and also subconsciously still looking for the same types of men because I was still so like my whole identity revolved around this man. And so I think that's why I kept repeating those relationships. But now I'm trying to really not lead with that because that's just a part of my chapter. It's not who I am. And so it's not something that I would open up about right away, but definitely in the future, like I'm would, if I'm comfortable with the person, then I'd be comfortable opening up about it. And if they were more curious about it, like I'm an open book, and um, if that scares them, then cool. If not, then that's my person. So
Yep.
great. But yeah, I think. I see a lot of women because I did this too, and I know a lot of other women do this, is they'll lead with their past. Like, I have trust issues because of this, and I have a hard time opening up because of this. And you can't go into it like that. You really can't. You have to heal those parts of you. And I always say, like, it's not that you don't trust other people, it's that you lack trust within yourself because you ultimately, last time you got into a relationship, you made the wrong decision. And so, if you really want to gain control and power back over your life, you have to take responsibility for those things and heal those things. Although abuse is never your fault, you have to understand like what brought you into that relationship.
And to your point, healing that trust with yourself is one of the hardest things to do. I still struggle with that. And I'll still make my little dark humor jokes where I'm like, I have trust issues. Please don't do that. And I just, because I panic and I'm like, I know what this means, but I don't want to talk about it right now. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's very real. That's a really real part of the post side of this that gets lost in the mix because so much of it is recovering and a lot of PTSD and a lot of trauma that you're getting rid of that trust with yourself rebuilding is not easy. to like trust that you're going to make the right decisions again. I don't know how many times I sat in a therapist's office and I said, I don't think this is the right call. And they're like, well, why? I'm like, I don't know. I just don't believe it. I don't believe anything anymore. I don't trust that any of this is going to work out. I don't trust that anybody's going to have my back. I don't trust that I'm going to make the right call. There was so much in trust. And when you said that, it was like it triggered another thing in me. I was like, oh, yeah, that's still deep down in there somewhere. It lingers.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think ultimately building trust within yourself is just becoming so crystal clear on who you are. Because if you know what your morals are and you know what your values are, and you're living life in alignment to those, then making decisions for yourself is going to become 1,000 times easier.
Will you also elaborate on the victim mentality? Because that was an experience I had too, where I really had to get out of this victim mentality.
Yeah, same here. I think it's something so obviously traumatic that happens to you, and it's so easy to put your whole identity in that. And I think that just comes with you not wanting to let go of something. And it's it's so like the words that you say are so powerful. And there has to be, I think where the shift happens is you have to realize like, okay, yes, this happened to me, but once you shift it to like, okay, how was this happening for me and what can I do to become better from this? That's when you can shift out of it. But it's so much like, I guess it's not easier, but sometimes it can feel easier to just sit in that pain because changing is hard, right? Acknowledging your mistakes as a human being is hard. It hurts your ego a little bit. And so sometimes it just is more comfortable to just sit in that.
Do you ever get clients that come to you and they're like, I think I'm in this, but I don't know?
Oh, yes.
What do you tell them when they come to you and they're in this position? Because I do think a lot of people will often hear my story. I'm sure they see yours and they're like, gosh, that sounds really familiar, but that couldn't be me. That's not me. There's no way that's what my relationship is. So when they come to you and they say, I think this is happening to me, what are you doing with them to help them see what's actually happening, or how are you helping them work through that potential experience?
I think just first of all, like validating their experience. And I know a lot of women just want to be validated and heard and understood. And ultimately, if you're questioning it, it's a pretty good indicator that something is going on. Um, and so it's it's so tricky because abuse is not like one size fits all. And so yeah, we get into this like comparing, like spiraling loop, and then we'll go and analyze like the narcissist and look up all these like traits of a narcissist and all these things. And at the end of the day, like if they are making you anxious and you're not feeling safe, I think a lot of women know that something's not right. Um, but accepting it more so is like the hard part, right? Because then they know that they have to leave. And so they're like justifying the behavior so they don't want to leave.
Well, and leaving a normal relationship is hard. You don't want to end something you're comfortable with. To your point, change is hard.
Yeah.
So then you add on the layers of, well, this is tumultuous or it's toxic or it's abusive. And you just threw like 15 extra layers onto what that leaving procedure is probably going to look like. And to your point, it isn't a one size fits all. But I love what you said that if you feel like something is wrong, that's your sign. Like if you're already questioning it, that's all really you need to know because truly, and I for my personal experience, like it took me recognizing it and leaving at vastly different timelines. Me realizing when it was happening to me versus when I finally was able to leave and feel safe to get out and make my very planned and executed exit was a very long time in between. And I think that happens for most people. And unfortunately, there is a even much harder side of this where it doesn't have a good ending. And that's also my hope in bringing you on and talking about this, even though it is so hard, is I don't want that ending for everyone. And you said it, like you should feel safe. You should feel happy in a relationship. You should feel good. And if you aren't feeling those things, this is beyond having an argument and a disagreement about life. This is genuinely not being able to exist with another person without feeling anxiety all the time. Like I would sleep next to my ex and I would be terrified. There were nights I would not sleep because I did not know what was coming. And I know that like that's a similar experience for a lot of people in abuse because you don't know what you're going to sleep next to. You don't know what you're waking up next to. You don't know what that next day is going to bring.
Yeah.
And I think your advice was so great for that though because it as much as it's not a one size fits all, that very intuition gut feeling is so important.
Yeah. And you said it right there, like awareness is not enough to leave. Like I was a criminology student. This is where I learned about all these narcissistic personality disorders because we actually have to diagnose criminals. And I'm like, oh my God, my boyfriend is like that. My boyfriend does that. And I started calling him out on all the, you're being manipulative, you're gaslighting. Like these terms were never like, never a thing. And that's how I learned them. But again, like I knew he was doing this to me and it wasn't enough to leave. And ultimately, you need to have, like, I treat it like an addiction. And so, like, every person who has a drinking problem, they all have that pivotal moment, that breaking point. They all remember that story, like the defining moment where they're like, I've had enough, I'm done. I remember mine. And you're at some point you have to reach that like pivotal defining moment for yourself. And it all depends on your pain tolerance. It all depends on like what is going on inside of you and your body, right? And we all have different levels of pain and what our threshold is. And so obviously I never want it to get to that point, but that's why it's so hard for me. Like I won't coach women if they're still in the abusive relationship, just because I know no one can tell you when to leave. You have to have that defining moment for yourself.
That's so true. It is because you could have everybody screaming at you from the rooftops that this is the worst thing, but until you feel it, much like addiction, that's also a great way of comparing it. You have to decide that for yourself. You have to have the strength to walk away because if you don't, you will go back. You will find yourself in this situation again. And strength is so important at the end.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, I saw on your social media pages that you had said you won't label yourself as a survivor of abuse. Will you share
Yeah.
why and that kind of reasoning for you?
Yeah. I personally I don't, like I had mentioned before, I don't want it to become my whole identity. This is something that I had lived through, experienced, and it was a big chapter in my life. But I ultimately have my control and my power back, and I don't want to see myself as a survivor anymore. I'm now thriving. So I don't like it because I just know what it can do to your mind and how it can affect life decisions. You know, I feel like if I still refer to myself as, a victim and a survivor, then I feel like I would have less control over my future and the relationships that I choose. Because at the end of the day, we actually do get to decide what relationships we get to be in.
Yeah, I love that. I had seen that and I wanted to hear it from your words because I feel the same way. And for it's kind of like the stages of grief, but the stages of abuse a little bit, where when I came out of it, I was in denial that it ever happened to me. Then I came to terms with it and I was like, okay, I am a survivor. And then you come out of that and you're like, okay, that's now just part of my story. It's very much stages that you experience, but gosh, I wish everybody could get to that, the place that you're in now quicker. And that's so hard because yeah, you're coming from someone who spent 3 years working on herself after my experience where I was like, don't touch me, don't talk to me. I have things to
Well,
figure out.
yeah, 100%. I mean, that's my goal is just help as many women as possible. Like, you don't have to struggle this long. Like, I've made all the mistakes for you guys. I promise you, like, I will guide you the right way. Like, you don't have to struggle in silence.
Yeah, I love what you're doing, and I'm really glad you came on and shared parts of your story. And is there anything you would like to leave us on? Anything we didn't touch on or talk about, or maybe some words of wisdom, however you want to leave us? I'm kind of leaving this floor to you.
Oh man, put me on the spot here.
I just want to make sure if there's anything else that I didn't touch on that you feel is so important, I want this to be the space for that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, honestly, if you I guess I just want to let like women know, like if you think that you will never find love or you'll never love someone like that again, like that I from someone who was crying to her mom saying, I will never love someone like that again. Like I promise you, you will, and it will be the best kind of love. And that love will be with yourself first before anything. And so anyone who is in their feels right now about that, this is coming from someone who felt that, and just know that that is just simply not true at all. You'll get through it.
The perfect way to end us on. I echo that statement. That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing again. Thanks for talking with me.
Thank you so much for having me on.